They called him the Body Snatcher, and for good reason. Throughout his impressive career, McCallum became known and feared for landing brutal body shots that sapped his opponent's energy and strength. Over a period of several fast-paced rounds, McCallum would completely overwhelm his competition, pounding them with a non-stop torrent of well-crafted combinations, applying pressure from every direction in every range. McCallum was not some spectacular head-hunting knockout artist, but to his competitors, he was something much, much worse. Like how the smallest stone can cause an earth-shaking avalanche, McCallum would begin slowly, then ramp up the intensity each and every round. There's a reason why so many of his competitors simply quit on their stools. So, let's take a look at how McCallum managed to combine beautiful outside boxing with non-stop inside pressure to create an absolutely devastating style. Unlike many body snatchers, who like to get up close and personal and stay there as long as possible, McCallum preferred to set up his killer body shots from mid to long range. Rather than enter inside with head movement, his body shots were mostly preceded with straight punches. And this method worked incredibly well. The reason being, there are only a few limited reactions the opponent may have when faced with these mid to long range attacks. And McCallum had an answer for all of them. The simplest response was to just tighten their guard. And this created small openings to either side for McCallum to sharpshoot, sneaking in his punches in between, underneath, or around their elbows. If the opponents tried to smother his work by moving closer, then an uppercut could clear space in the same way. If McCallum's opponent had an uneducated guard, then they may raise both of their hands at the same time as well, creating huge openings that didn't even require McCallum to use his normal finesse. But it's been said before that sometimes the best defense is to simply not be there. Unless, that is, you are facing Mike McCallum, who punished his competitors just as badly for attempting head movement as he did for blocking. When opponents tried to slip, duck, or weave to avoid McCallum's linear punches, McCallum used it against them, taking advantage of the new openings that had been created, and brilliantly angling in punches to their now open sides. While ducking or crouching exposed the opponent's ribs, and brought them in range for McCallum's looping punches, slipping far offline was even worse. By moving their head off of the center line to avoid McCallum's straights, opponents unintentionally made the opening on the opposite side much bigger, giving McCallum the perfect opportunity to throw a well-timed body shot. But this didn't mean that opponents were safe on the other side. While opponents may have been less exposed in the direction they'd slipped because there was less of an opening, they had also brought that side closer in range to McCallum's attacks, and he was exceptionally good at angling in punches through the guard. Adding insult to injury, this setup also worked in reverse, as opponents lowered their guard to block body shots and desperately tried to exit the exchange. McCallum would return to throwing straight punches as his opponents tried to escape. And while McCallum could almost always get away with firing off a few parting jabs, he sometimes managed to add on a hard right as well. But unfortunately, opponents seemed to like to punch back. Luckily for McCallum, he was just as skilled at setting up body shots when it came to defending and countering. When it came to defense, McCallum mostly relied on head movement to protect his head and a tight guard to protect his body. He would keep his arms slightly low and tight against his body, ensuring there was no cracks in his armor. This way, the Body Snatcher didn't need to worry about getting his own body snatched. Meanwhile, relying almost exclusively on head movement to keep his head safe was far more than just a defensive tactic. By moving his upper body far off the center line, he actually opened up new targets for his punches, placing himself at the correct distance and angle to circumvent his opponent's forearms and elbows. For every kind of punch a boxer throws, they leave certain openings that are best targeted with specific kinds of counters. But body shots are a bit of a cheat, because they work well to counter pretty much every kind of punch thrown. The caveat is that body counters require the fighter to get much closer and maneuver themselves into very difficult positions. But McCallum had the skills to pull this off with incredible consistency. Perhaps McCallum's favorite counter was to pull, slip, or duck to the outside, loading up a hard right hand to the body. And while some of these shots were clearly devastating, some looked as if they were thrown with the same intensity as a golfer gently putting a ball into the hole. This is intelligence and nuance. By staying patient and throwing smaller shots, McCallum stayed balanced so that he could quickly follow up with multiple punches. What's more, several small shots to the same area add up real quick in a fight. As Muhammad Ali put it, it's not the mountain left to climb that wears you out. It's the pebble in your shoe, or in this case, your kidney. This same evasion paired well with the right uppercut up the middle. McCallum must have known that any time a fighter can throw two equally devastating attacks off of the same setup, it forces the opponent into making a terrifying split-second decision. If they guess that the wrong attack is coming, they may defend in the exact opposite way necessary. Although he didn't use it quite as often, McCallum was also great at slipping inside to counter with his left. While his lead hand didn't hit near as hard as his power hand, connecting to the right side of his opponent's body meant he had a chance at hitting their liver. It can be hard to understand just how brutal several small, nipping shots to the area can be over an extended period of time. By the later rounds, McCallum's opponents must have felt like they were wearing a vest made entirely of wasps. And this setup paired very well with McCallum's lead head hook counter. And the great thing was that his offensive and defensive tactics could work together. McCallum's long-range linear punches would often prompt a counter, which in turn allowed him to respond with his own counter. And then, when McCallum's opponents retreated from his body shots, he could begin the process again, chasing them with linear punches. In this way, he denied them even a moment's rest. And in case all of this wasn't mentally and physically exhausting enough, McCallum usually followed up his body shots with a barrage of well-developed follow-up punches. It's important to note that the principles behind McCallum's tactics are far more important than the specific way he did things. For example, Inoue's body punches are much different than McCallum's in setup, selection, and execution, but both use the same underlying principles we've covered in this video. In fact, McCallum himself had a lot more setups and counters than the ones that we covered. In the end, it's the concepts behind the application that matters. However, if you're looking for a blueprint for setting up body shots, there are few more deserving than Mike McCallum. So, who do you think was the best body puncher of all time? And if you need some ideas, you can check out my technique books on power, defense, and footwork, linked below. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.